U.S. President Barack Obama continues his historic visit in Cuba. Protesters rally for Palestine in Washington, D.C. And just when you thought it could not get any worse, homicide figures increase in Honduras. Those are our headlines. My name is Reagan, Vignes, and this is From the South. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin with the U.S. President Barack Obama, who is continuing his visit on the island nation of Cuba. It's the first time in nearly 90 years that a U.S. president has visited the country. Now Obama touched down in Havana on Sunday evening. He's already visited the historic center of the capital, and on Monday morning, he laid a wreath at the memorial to Cuban freedom fighter and a national hero, Jose Marti. During the joint press conference with Cuban President Raul Castro, Obama said that the blockade on the nation will end, but he did not say when.
The embargo is going to end. When? I can't be entirely sure, but I believe it will end, and the path that we're on will continue beyond my administration. The reason is logic. The reason is that what we did for 50 years did not serve our interests or the interests of the Cuban people.
For his part, President Raul Castro reiterated his call for an end to the Cuban blockade.
The blockade is the most challenging obstacle for economic development and the welfare of the Cuban people. That is why it is essential for it to be removed if we are to normalize bilateral relations, in order to continue to restore relations. It is also necessary to return the illegally occupied territory of Guantanamo Naval Base.
And for reactions to Obama's visit to the United States, we have this report from our correspondent in Washington, Bianca Perez.
A new poll published by ABC and the New York Times on the second day of President Obama's visit to Cuba shows that 6 out of 10 U.S. citizens support the reestablishment of relations between Cuba and the United States and view the president's visit as favorable for both nations.
I think it's a good visit. I think it's a lot more than just a visit. I think that it's a new start for America with Cuba.
I think it's bringing new alliance, for the world and for Cuba. I think it's a great move. To see the world starting to unite together, because it's been over 80-something years since the U.S. president's been to Cuba. So to see this happening is a good step.
Nearly half of those polled would like to see the Guantanamo Bay prison closed. The territory occupied by the U.S. naval base is one of the biggest obstacles in the way of true reestablishment of relations between the two nations. Even with the hefty opposition in Congress, Obama appears to offer the best hope of closing the prison, because leading presidential candidates are staunchly against closing the base, particularly Donald Trump.
We can be certain that when it comes to things like Guantanamo, he's not going to be budging on that. He's going to be, still claiming that it's holding terrorists and whatnot. But these are the kind of things. So a lot of it is still up in the air, and it's even up in the air who is going to be president. So that's a huge question.
U.S. media outlets covered how President Obama has brought up the issue of human rights in Cuba during his visit to Havana. However, little has been said of Cuban President Raul Castro's call for the need to respect economic and social rights internationally, or the complicated human rights record within the United States.
When you look at the United States record, right now it's becoming increasingly evident from people around the world that the United States has serious problems, even with human rights violations right here in the United States, and being able to juxtapose those with other countries. Cuba can, honestly brag that they don't have police shooting, black people down in the streets every 28 hours. The United States can't say that same thing.
And for many, this is a time.
As the first day of scheduled activities comes to an end, President Barack Obama affirmed that the economic blockade will end, but the question is when. External factors such as a majority Republican Congress and the upcoming presidential election could delay this process. Bianca Perez, teleSur's, Washington, D.C.
And we turn now to Bianca Perez, live in Washington, for more on the U.S. president's visit to Cuba. Hi, Bianca, it's good to see you. A lot of excitement by the Cuban people in Cuba on the arrival of President Barack Obama. Well, but in your report, you said that there's some stress happening in the U.S. Has there been any backlash by conservatives there?
Hi, Reagan. Nice to see you too. Yes, there has been some backlash, specifically in the House of Representatives. Some of the representatives said that I guess Obama is not doing enough by simply meeting with the Cuban people, that this is not necessarily going to help as they continue to claim the advancement of Cuba. However, there have also been positive reactions, and specifically in the campaign trail, Senator Sanders and Hillary Clinton have supported the visit. So there's been sort of a mixed review of both positive and negative backlash against and in favor of this visit, of course.
Now, one of the major concerns, of course, is the blockade on Cuba, which President Obama says that it will be removed, but he doesn't know when. What are the other concerns? What is hoped to come out of his visit to Cuba?
Well, the White House continues to say that the purpose of this visit early on is to kind of continue along in this building of reestablishment of relations. And of course, the biggest obstacle is the blockade, because ultimately Congress is who decides whether or not this will end or it will continue. So there's a lot of concern in this promise that Obama made, in that it will end, because realistically, it is really up to Congress and in a majority Republican Congress that we've seen a lot of backlash from them in terms of ever ending this blockade. So it will be interesting to see what sort of actions he will take in order to move forward with that promise. But of course, also the base in Guantanamo is something that the Cuban government has said needs to be removed in order to move forward, also in the reestablishment of relations. And I think one of the biggest things is the Helms-Burton law, which sort of gives the U.S. this continuation of wanting to end or to remove from power the current Cuban government. And that, I think, is a huge obstacle in between the relations, because it makes it difficult for one government to trust the other when they know that their ultimate goal is sort of to remove them from power. So those three things, I think, are probably going to be the biggest obstacles moving forward.
Definitely, you're right. And of course, we understand that President Barack Obama is meeting with the president this evening at the presidential palace, having dinner. So hopefully we can touch base with you tomorrow, Bianca, for more updates. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Reagan.
In Honduras, the government assures that the number of homicides is decreasing. But according to national media, this year has actually seen an increase in the murder rate. Our correspondent Raul Torres explains.
Honduran National Police doesn't present the real numbers of how many people are violently murdered. Since last year, the government's database registered just incidents, and a massacre and a single murder are registered as one incident each. Experts say the government's statement that violence has reduced is just manipulation.
Es una política perversa.
This is a perverse policy. It's a policy intended to lower unrest and reduce the perceived impact of violence, but it doesn't address the real situation.
Es decir, manipula.
This means that they manipulate the scenario of what is the real impact and of the massacres that have happened more often this year. A massacre is counted as an incident, but it doesn't explain that in that incident, 5 or 12 people were killed.
The family of the victims of violence demand investigation on the crimes of their loved ones, but authorities underestimate these investigations in an attempt to hide the real numbers and to change public opinion about the violent situation. Not even the deaths of police officers have any follow-ups.
My sister was a police officer. She was murdered by 2 men in a bus. The prosecutors and investigators that had the case didn't do any investigation. The only information they had was a single sheet of a report at the moment when they picked up the dead body.
2 weeks ago, in less than 3 days, 5 massacres were reported on national media with more than 50 killings. There was no statement from the government, and none of the incidents have had a proper investigation initiated. Gerardo Torres, TeleSur, Tegucigalpa.
The policy conference hosted by the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, is in its second day. Former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was the featured speaker earlier today. During her speech, Clinton pledged to deepen security and diplomatic ties with Israel. On Sunday, Republicans Donald Trump and John Kasich made speeches while Senator Bernie Sanders declined to attend. Meanwhile, on Sunday, demonstrators protested outside the AIPAC conference, demanding an end to the occupation of Palestinian lands. Our correspondent Abi Martin was there and brings us this report.
Here outside the AIPAC convention, you can see that the movement in support of Palestinian rights is alive and full of energy, making it harder and harder for this lobby to continue controlling the narrative. With support for Palestine growing all over the world, protesters say that the U.S. has a particular significance, a particular role to play because it's the principal financier of Israel's crimes, to the tune of $3 billion a year. Why AIPAC? Why is AIPAC such a big symbol for Palestinian solidarity?
Well, I think it just shows how infiltrated Zionist interests are in the United States. How is it possible that this entity that is funneled all these weapons is allowed to pretty much run free in terms of its oppression? How can it be possible that it can govern policy in the U.S. and actually influence so many of our congresspeople, senators? So I think it's that tie and that contradiction that we're talking about.
Viva Palestina! AIPAC is really a symbol for not just the right of Israelis to take over land, but really to do it in an aggressive manner, which is to the detriment of the Palestinian people. Where it's really a convergence of people who are Zionists, who believe that the Palestinian people have no right to their land, have no right to freedom, have no right to justice, and to really be out here as a presence to stand against it.
Syrian government and opposition delegations arrived in Geneva earlier today for the second week of the UN-led peace talks. After the meeting, the Syrian regime reiterated its stance that a political transition in Syria and the fate of its president were two separate issues.
President Assad has nothing to do with the Syrian indirect talks. The references of our talks do not indicate anything, do not give any indication whatsoever with regard to the issue of the president of the Syrian Arab Republic. So this is something that is already excluded from the scene.
The new EU-Turkey migrant deal came into effect on Sunday. Earlier today, 18 Turkish officials arrived to help implement the new deal, which sends refugees back to Turkey. However, it's not clear what will happen to the some 50,000 refugees already in Greece. The International Court of Justice has found Congolese politician Jean-Pierre Bemba guilty of murder, rape and pillaging. The crimes were committed by his troops in the Central African Republic between 2002 and 2003. Bemba's long-running trial was the first at the ICC to feature allegations of systemic sexual abuse by soldiers in a conflict. Zanzibar's incumbent President Ali Mohammed Shein has been declared the winner of this weekend's election, garnering 91% of the votes. 15 European and US diplomats issued a joint statement regretting the weekend vote, which was boycotted by the opposition. Although there have been some recent high-profile raids in Belgium, resulting in the arrest of suspects of the Paris attacks that occurred on November 13th, Belgium's federal prosecutor says investigators are still far from solving the puzzle.
It's still too early to define each person's role. We have a number of pieces in the puzzle, and recently a number of pieces have found their place. I'm still a long way from having finished, and we're still far from having solved the puzzle.
Catalonia has called for 2 days of mourning for the 13 foreign university students killed in a bus accident there on Sunday. The students were on a European exchange program and came from 16 different countries, including Britain, Switzerland, and Japan, among others. Returning to the topic of Cuba and the United States, baseball fans are gearing up for an exhibition game on Tuesday between the Cuban national team and the Tampa Bay Rays Major League Club. The game will be the second played between the Cuban national team and a Major League Baseball club since 1999, when the Baltimore Orioles played in Havana. The owner of the Tampa Bay Rays says he's excited about the prospects of strengthening relations through baseball.
About having the presidents of both countries. We're excited, obviously, about having the presidents of both countries at the game. but mostly just to bring the game of baseball here and be a part of something that it really will be significant. I know that as we look back at this many years from now, it is most likely the first of many encounters we will have, whether it's Tampa Bay or another major league team, minor league team, potentially, with the country.
Puppet troops, along with professional and amateur puppeteers, gathered at Times Square in New York to celebrate World Puppetry Day. The event to mark the day was hosted by the Stars of Avenue Q, which is an off-Broadway production starring, you guessed it, puppets. World Puppetry Day celebrates the art form that, according to Puppeteers of America, is as old as mankind and is just as relevant today. For more of these and other stories, you can visit our website, telesurtv.net/English. And you can also check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages as well. From all of us here at TeleSur, have a great night. My name is Reagan.